Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll cover all the home teams, the New Orleans Saints, the LSU Tigers, and I promise we will get to the Tulane Green Wave this week. Got a great panel for you guys that cover all those teams. Joining us on the program tonight, Chris Hagan of Fox 8 Sports and Brett Martel of the Associated Press. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks as always for being with us. We always like to start the show off, letting folks know a little bit about what you're involved in. Chris, let's start with you tonight.
Well, it's football season, so you know we're busy over there at Fox 8. We've got Fox 8 Football Friday coming on Friday nights with our high school show. The Fox 8 Live Tailgate Sunday mornings, the Final Play on Sunday evenings, Jim Henderson's Black and Gold Review Monday evenings, Saints Game Plan Thursday nights. So really a lot to look forward to. And then plenty on fox8live.com, including my fantasy football blog, The Extra Point. Just got that up and going last week. A lot of good stuff there, so be sure to check it out.
By the way, I've been enjoying that blog.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Very, very good. Brett, welcome back.
Yep.
Please tell us a little bit about what you're involved in, of course, the Associated Press as well.
Right, AP, Worldwide News Organization, headquarters in New York. I'm kind of the Louisiana sports correspondent to the world, if you will. And right now I'm mostly focused on Saints and LSU football, but we'll be getting into Pelicans soon. And as well as, you know, I'm overseeing Division I football in the state when it's newsworthy,
Yeah.
Tulane included.
Sure. And guys, let's kick it off. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the Saints first. And they lose to the Raiders, go 0-1, 35-34 on Sunday, a game that a lot of people believe they should have won, including myself. The last 19 minutes of the game were a debacle. But before we get into the game, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happened off the field this week. And that was the release of C.J. Spiller, which left them, with dead money this year of about $4.5 million for him against the cap, a little bit more than $2 million next year, $40 million in dead money now this year, $35 last year. And as we were talking a little bit about before we came on air today, you know, Drew Brees renegotiates his deal, and it looks like between Unger and Brees, those deals were renegotiated so the Saints could be able to, again, get rid of players that were under contract that they felt obviously weren't able to help them anymore. And Chris, man, this town is really, really upset with, again, more dead money, which could have meant more players for this team down the line. I've heard the frustration on my radio show, just walking the street, on social media. I'm sure you're hearing the same thing.
That's right. I think the big thing is it's not necessarily a bad thing to go out and get these type of players and spend the money if you think and if you know, if you have a good feeling that these guys can be good for the team. But I think when you do that and you miss as much as they have, nobody's going to look at necessarily or look as much at the dead money or the salaries or, you know, high spending as much if you keep these guys around and they can contribute in a positive way. The problem is, like you mentioned, they've missed with C.J. Spiller. A lot of dead money coming from Junior Gillette a couple of years ago, as we talked about on the show before. And then you still got a couple of misses that are on the team when you look at guys like Jairus Byrd, who aren't panning out to what the Saints thought they would be at all. And so it's something that's hurting them now. And as you mentioned, more dead money against the cap, you know, the next couple of years as well. So it's not done, unfortunately.
We're going to talk about Brees' contract in a minute, but even dead money in his contract as they renegotiated the deal. What's your take? What are you hearing about the dead money?
Well, it has hindered their ability to compete for the best free agents, and you know, is probably affecting them in the win-loss column. And I think you know, it would be naive not to say that their record over the last couple of years isn't tied to how hamstrung they are financially. So, you know, if you want to find a silver lining in it, I know you'd expect me to do this, right? Because this is my MO.
You're the half glass, half full guy.
So what you hope is that they're learning from their mistakes and they're not in total denial about it. And the fact that they're willing to take all the heat for cutting these guys and have the dead money says that they have the confidence to admit when they're wrong and try to move on and get better. The problem is, you know, they better get better soon because it just keeps piling up and it's to a point where it's almost untenable now if you want to compete for a playoff spot.
And then comes in the question of accountability. I mean, that's the big question I've been getting. People have been talking about it for a long time. You know, the old Tom Benson would not have stood for all this dead money, paying players to not be on the team, inability to be able to really compete in free agency, having to go with undrafted free agents or bargain basement free agents to be able to fill out your roster, and then of course missing in the drafts. You know, the question is looming, and no pun intended here, with Mickey Loomis and also Sean Payton. Where's the accountability in terms of player evaluation, and then ultimately paying those players and bringing them in with all this dead money?
Well, I think that the thing that you really don't want to ask in a couple of years is you don't want to look back at this team and say, what if there wasn't all this dead money, and what if this wasn't an issue? You don't want to look at the Drew Brees window and say, what if we could have had the players that they need on the defensive side of the ball? What if they could have had a couple more playoff runs? Because after 2011, even 2013, there was no way you were thinking that this is where the Saints would be in a couple of years, because on paper, on 2014, they were written into the NFC Championship, and then things have fallen apart ever since. And so I think that's where accountability comes in, and they've got to realize that, and kind of like Brett said, you've got to realize that, you've got to own that mistake, and it's a tough hole to pull yourself out of right now, especially when, like you mentioned, you're trying to sign bargain bin free agents and make a winning team out of it in a division that's pretty tough with the Panthers looming. But they've got to do something in a hurry.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, are they moving in the right direction recently? And you could say, well, they have made changes in their scouting department, right? Brought in Jeff Ireland. And, we'll see how this year's free agents pan out. Obviously, last year's free agents didn't. And from a couple of years ago, Jarris Byrd, like Chris said, isn't really meeting expectations at all, but he's good enough to be better than whatever else they have. Although you could argue, depending on how the season goes, that at some point they might be better off seeing what Von Bell can do. So they are trying to address it and making changes, and they're gonna have to get lucky here with if they want to compete in the short term.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I want to stay with Jarris Byrd for a moment, because I've keyed in on him for the last, since he's been on the field, really. I was a guy that when they signed him thought this was going to be a great signing. This would be a Darren Sharper type signing. When you look at his career at Buffalo, had great range. He was a ball hawk. He was also a headhunter. He laid the wood when you came across the middle. Since the injury, and of course coming to New Orleans injured, and having the back surgery, knee surgery, he's not the same guy. Last week I spotted him on the sideline with the hot pack on the knee. He doesn't have the same range. He doesn't have the same speed. He's playing, I think, a little tentative. He's not a headhunter. You look at all the big plays this team has given up in the last couple seasons. Normally, a safety's back there to be able to stem that. And even this week with a 74-yard run by Richard, he got tangled up, I think it was with Devontae Harris, and of course that turned into a big play. Again, a byproduct of being maybe a step slow and out of position. You mentioned Von Bell. I get it, but I think the Saints are in a tough spot now. You're starting, again, a defensive backfield that does not have any really NFL experience, and short of maybe the old San Francisco 49ers when they started a bunch of rookies in their defensive backfield with a pretty darn good front seven up front. I guess you're at a position right now where you're kind of wondering, wow, here's another guy that doesn't look like he's panning out. And as you mentioned, Brett, I think the question is, how long till we see a Von Bell?
I think health has had a huge issue to do with it, like you've mentioned. I also think that on top of having an inexperienced secondary, and then even your veteran guys like Jarris Byrd, who aren't able to play as well as they should, is the fact that there's no pass rush, and they're not getting any help in that department. And I think I'm not defending Brandon Browner, because I think he was not, playing as best as he could, but at the same time, he came from systems where there were pass rush, and it makes a corner's job a lot easier to do that. And with the Saints not being able to get any pressure on quarterbacks, I mean, you saw it with Derek Carr last week. There was a play where he hit Amari Cooper down the left side of the field. It looked like when you're playing football in your front yard and you get 8 Mississippi before anybody can come at you. No one was near Carr. He didn't move off his spot at all. And he sat there and he picked him apart, and that happened on multiple plays. And so I think when you look at that and the fact that Bird isn't what he used to be, and you've got undrafted free agents out there running around, it's not good.
Yeah. Brett, what
Well,
can you add?
Jarris, you know, there's a risk-reward proposition to when you take him out because the safeties kind of oversee communication and pre-snap alignments and coverage responsibilities for the whole secondary. And Von Bell is very inexperienced in that regard. So before the snap, you know, Bird's probably a little more cerebral at this point and more savvy about what's going on. I think, you know, when you look at him post-injury, that's where the problem is because, you know, and part of this is just my experience covering the NFL for over 10 years, and part of it I think is just common sense about human nature. Young guys who have never been hurt can play with that reckless abandon because, first of all, they're healthy, and second of all, they just don't have it in their mind what it's like to be hurt and what the cost is of playing that way. Bird knows now from experience what the cost is of playing that way, and some guys, you know, you hope the veterans who last the longest in the NFL are the ones who they say, oh, the mental side compensates for the degradation of my physical skills, right? But some guys, it just doesn't work for them that way. And, you know, Jarris just may never be as effective, you know, without the ability to play like he used to play in Buffalo. So it's going to put a premium on his mental acumen, and I guess that the Saints right now are seeing, you know, that is his biggest benefit being out there right now.
Let's talk a little bit about the defensive backfield because that's going to be critical this week against the Giants. P.J. Williams is now your most experienced corner. Devontae Harris, Ken Crawley. They bring in two veterans this week. Looks like Sterling Moore may be a starter before it's all said and done. B.W. Webb was brought in as well. I mean, they're in a tough spot for a position that looked like a position of strength earlier in training camp. To be lining up Devontae Harris, Ken Crawley, and P.J. Williams last week in the last quarter of the game. It's one of the reasons why obviously the Saints suffered as much as they did in terms of trying to stop the Oakland Raiders. Your thoughts on where they are? Can Moore and Webb make an immediate difference here? You know, you're losing a guy in Bro who was a lockdown guy, and it's going to be very, very difficult in my opinion.
I don't know if an immediate difference can be made, but I think it is an improvement just to have guys that have been on the field in that position and gone up against some of the league's best receivers, whether it be with other teams or not. I think part of the depth issue and the inexperience issue comes back to some of the misses they've had in free agency. When you lose a guy like Browner who you had on a multi-year deal and you thought he could have been around for a while and provided that experience, that's what leaves you here. And when you go into the draft, obviously, you've got needs. You can only fill so many of them. You know, when you're trading up picks to get Von Bell and trading up picks to take other guys, like you can only fill so many holes in that roster. And defensive back wasn't really one of them, or cornerback wasn't really one of them this year. And so it's going to leave you with a bit of inexperience.
Yeah, and another huge loss, Keenan Lewis as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Lewis was a very good cornerback, and you start to wonder, well, if they just could have waited for him to get healthy, would they have been better off in the long run keeping him? In the meantime, the two new guys they have, Moore and Webb, I think, you know, the big fear is that they're going to end up being Band-Aids when you need a tourniquet. But yeah, at the same time, you know, there are instances when players, first of all, they should be very motivated because they're coming in off the street. And second of all, there are instances when players end up with the right fit, there's the right chemistry with the defensive coordinator and the guys around them, and they end up playing the best football of their lives in this very situation. If, you know, if that's the case, then it'll work. But that's probably less than 50% chance.
Right. But Brett, as Chris mentioned earlier, they've got to get a pass rush. I mean, Paul Kruger, I keyed in on him last week. He's probably still getting acclimated to the system. Cam Jordan looks like maybe that back surgery is still lingering a bit. You know, the loss of Rankin's obviously hurt them on the inside. Fairley, I thought, played a pretty decent game, but, you know, they're not affecting the quarterback, and they haven't for a couple seasons now, which means now they're probably going to have to manufacture a pass rush, which means that more than likely these young corners or these newcomers are going to have to be on an island playing one-on-one football.
Yeah, you're just going to have to hope that you can come up with some good safety blitzes or something like that. I mean, I do remember Roman Harper being one of their leading sack guys several years back, and you kind of hope that maybe they can rekindle some of that. But other than that, this defense has had, they were thin coming in, they needed good luck with injuries coming in, and they've had bad luck. They've had arguably one of the best players at each position group go down. The top overall pick, Sheldon Rankin's in the middle of the defensive line. Daniel Ellerbe, he hasn't played much at all since he's gotten here, but when he does play, he looks like the best linebacker on the field.
But at least Robinson's playing pretty well.
Yeah, he has played well. And he has played very well, and that was an unfortunate penalty on him. Really, he didn't deserve. Football's a cruel game, because he did not deserve. That's his legacy from that game. He didn't deserve that. He was like one of the leading tacklers in the whole defense in that game. And then, of course, in the secondary now you have their best cornerback going down. So between Ellerbe, Bro, and Rankins, those are going to be like 3 key guys in the defense, and they're already out. Right.
So. And plus, you thought that Keenan Lewis would be part of this team, as well as we just mentioned. Man. What's your thought on the pass rush? What can they do? I mean, they're in a very, very difficult spot right now with the inability to be able to rush the pass. And this has been lingering now for a few seasons.
Well, I think in terms of this week, it's not Derek Carr. Now, I know Eli Manning he's a Super Bowl champ. So you got to respect him. But I think Derek Carr's mobility gave them some extra problems to deal with. You heard it from Tyler Davison, from Fresno State guy to Fresno State guy, compared him to Aaron Rodgers. And on some plays, he does move and get the ball away like him. So I think you have a little bit more of a chance with a guy like Eli who's been mistake-prone at times. He can come out and throw 4 touchdowns. He can come out and throw 4 interceptions. I don't think the latter is going to be the case this week. But at the same time, if you can manufacture some rush, whether it be blitz, maybe you come down with an interception, maybe you just have to keep the game close enough. I think that this Saints offense, one thing that I don't think's gotten nearly enough credit is the offensive line and the integral part they played in the Saints putting up over 500 yards of offense. If they can keep this game close enough, I think that if the defense can force just something to happen, a mistake from Eli, a fumble here or there, it's not totally going to get away from the Saints, and your offense can do enough to keep you in it. But, like you said, with the pass rush, it's going to be tough. They're going to have to get really creative in that department because when you got Cam Jordan, who maybe still has a lingering injury, a lot of people forget about Holi Kakaha, who's going to be a major part of that pass rush.
Who's not on IR, by the way, so maybe they're feeling that he can come back?
Yeah, I think that's a real long shot, but I really think that's more of just keeping all of their options open, just using whatever maneuverability they have just in case. But I don't think they see that as a probability.
Right.
Yeah. Either way, it's going to be tough. That's a department that you hate to say you're just going to have to deal with it, but they're already struggling to have depth at corner. I don't know what else they can do to kind of bring in anyone else who can pass rush or make something else happen there.
Right. Well, Kruger fell in their laps. Did you guys get a chance to kind of key in on him like I did? And if you did, Brett, what were your thoughts on Kruger after one game? Look, he's got to get acclimated to the system. He even said that this week, so that he can just go ahead and react to a play instead of having to think about what his responsibilities are.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to key in on him much, but I just noticed over the course of covering that first game that he just wasn't that involved in creating pressure or in defense in general. So I mean, I think he has a history though of having a number of good games, and I've always kind of liked him since he played at Utah. Actually, I covered him in the Sugar Bowl, and I remember he has a good sense of humor. He was saying before the game against Alabama he doesn't understand why a quarterback like John Parker Wilson needs 3 names. And but he's but guys like that can keep the locker room loose. They can be really good guys, and he is a physical presence. So yeah, I think Saints fans were hoping to see more from him.
Yeah, guys with 3 names are normally serial killers, so not quarterbacks. What are your thoughts?
Kind of like Brett said, I'm sure he's doing everything he can do to be acclimated. It's almost an unfair position. You see it with Kruger. You've seen it with a number of guys. Khalif Barnes reportedly visiting with the team again. You're brought in so quickly because the Saints have so many needs, and then it's you've got to impress in that workout, or you want to see the production right away on the field, and it's not always fair to ask that when a lot of other guys in the position group have been there for all of training camp, and all of a sudden you're coming in and asked to be an immediate, effective guy. There are guys on teams. You look at Khalil Mack, who's an elite pass rusher who had no real effect on the Saints, and so I think to ask Paul Kruger to come in and right away be a game changer, I wouldn't say so, but certainly in the next couple of weeks, and especially after that bye week when you're getting into the real meat of what is a really tough schedule, you hope he can be acclimated by then, because that can be what they really need.
You mentioned the offensive line. I think a lot of it has been very, very critical of the offensive line coming into the regular season because of the way they performed in preseason. But I went back, I watched the game again, and even I was impressed with them in real time. And going back, I was still impressed, even though, again, Breeze was hurried at times. He did, obviously, with his feet, make time to be able to deliver the football. You had guys, again, Clemente and Lolito, that were being moved in and out. Jari Evans, obviously, also being moved in and out. And then, of course, the loss of Josh Hill, the tight end position, forced those guys to get involved in the heavy package. But overall, I thought they played a very good game on Sunday against the Raiders, on a team that has some pretty good pass rushers.
Yeah, especially considering what we saw in the preseason. As you said, they were collectively ripped by the media just about every game.
And deservedly so.
Oh, and deservedly so. I think there was, you want to talk about accountability, that was an area we certainly saw some. I love that all the heat that Zach Strief gets, and he should get credit for still talking to the media all the time. And I think he spoke for the offensive line and spoke very well when he said, they never felt more responsible for a loss or for a poor performance than they did. I believe that was against Pittsburgh. Yeah. And so I think they really did some kind of looking in the mirror and said, we are going to be the difference between an offense that can really showcase its weapons or an offense that gets a quarterback killed in the pocket.
Yeah. Brett, what's your take on the offensive line? Is this something that can carry over week to week now, or is this an isolated game with these guys coming in and playing very well? Because even Pete played well at the left guard position.
I think when they're actually scheming for a regular season game, it's a little bit different with how nuanced the blocking is. Not just the offensive line, but the running backs and the tight ends and everything that goes on there. And Sean Payton has proven to be good at that over the years. I mean, you can't get over 500 yards of offense without the offensive line being at least competent.
Sure.
And look what they had the most yards of any team in week one. Still lost, but they had the most yards. So, I wouldn't be too worried. I think the offensive line at this point is not among their top concerns.
Right. Pleasantly surprised by the wide receiving core. We kind of knew what you had in Snead after last year. They're finally figuring out how to utilize Brandon Cooks. And then, of course, Michael Thomas looks like a superstar. I'm worried about those guys being able to get off the jam and in this timing offense be where they need to be, especially when they have to read what's going on in terms of the secondary. But those guys were really, really good last week.
I think what impressed me most is that both Snead and Cooks play above their size. The ball that Cooks caught in between two defenders in the end zone, first of all, that was a pass on the money by Breeze to get it over the linebacker and in between those guys. But then for Cooks to come down with that ball says a lot about the stigma of, he's a speed guy. I've had some of my friends say, I don't think he's a top receiver candidate. No, I think he's proven that he's got the toughness and the ability to go up and make plays. And then Willie Snead, like you mentioned, we saw last year what he could do. I think he's taken a step forward. Obviously, his connection with Drew Brees and Brees' trust in him to come down with those tough balls and be a possession receiver on third downs has grown. You look at 9 receptions, he caught all 9 targets that Brees threw his way. So they've definitely taken a step forward in that area. And then Michael Thomas, a bonus. Not to mention you've got Kobe Fleener, who wasn't even a big part of that game. And so I think when they get him going, that's an even more dangerous passing attack. So certainly, it went from a receiving core who you look at it on paper, you're looking at a rookie, Snead, and a first-round pick in Cooks, and then all of a sudden they become a very dangerous trio.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Thomas has so much upside. Maybe not exhibited any better than not his catch, but the fumble recovery.
Yes,
right.
Because, I mean, look, even in the NFL, how many times have you seen a ball on the ground and you feel like a player's right there to recover it, and all of a sudden there's like involuntary convulsion, right? Yeah. It's like the nerves and the intensity and the adrenaline. They somehow land on the ball and it squirts away. They don't end up with it. This guy just fluidly runs on, grabs it, keeps going, almost scores a touchdown. He has so much upside as just a composed and talented player. And the fact that he was the least productive out of the 3 receivers is a really good sign. Snead, you know, I mean, you don't want him to fumble that ball, but he made a lot of great plays. And Cooks, I think you're right about him. I mean, maybe the best favor that we could do to any Saints fan is ask Cooks if his strength and height is a liability every week, because he gets mad when people talk about that. Have you noticed that in the locker room?
He doesn't want to talk about that.
He gets mad, but you know, I think it helps with the attitude with which he plays, and I think you're right on the money in your assessment of him. That was a tremendous game by him.
Yeah, and with Michael Thomas, you can see it, his maturity. You can hear it talking to him. He was far and away the star of training camp. All the one-handed catches, all the eyes he turned, and then, you know, for him to, you talk to him, and he's so, I just want to get in the playbook. I want to continue to get better. He's very monotone, but you can tell he's about his business, and it showed on the field, like you mentioned, with his composure to scoop that ball. I think he said in an interview, you know, he was ready for it. That ball can get poked out at any moment, and he's ready there to get it.
He definitely plays above his years in the NFL. Tight end all of a sudden is a position where they're a little bit shaky. Hill gets injured last week. Hooman goes out. He's their best blocking tight end. Fleener shows some consistency that he still had when he was in Indianapolis. He's got to catch those balls that again are being thrown his way. They've almost got to find. In the beginning, I said I thought that they maybe need to find a blocking tight end, but when they went that heavy package with the tackles, it seemed to work pretty well in helping the running game and protecting Drew Brees as well.
It did, and like I said, I think Fleener's time will come. I think he's another one of those guys. I know he's had a camp and he's had, you know, the spring and off-season workouts to get in touch with Drew Brees and find that connection. But I think he's a guy that'll come along. There will be bigger weeks for him. You know, the Saints love to use their backs and tight ends as well as their receivers. I just think some of those other guys had the hot hand this week.
What about the tight ends? Do you see them going out? I know they signed a tight end to a practice squad this week. Is there a need for that blocking tight end?
Well, I think the signing a guy to the practice squad is a good sign that they don't think Josh Hill is that serious. He might not play this week, but even if he doesn't play this week, I think they were so pleased with how the jumbo package worked that they view that as a kind of a tenable short-term solution in that area. And they just, you're right, though. They need Fleener more involved.
They really do. What about the running back by committee? We've seen that in the past with this team. Peyton seemed to go to it with everybody having their own little niche. It looked like it worked out pretty well this week.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the running backs like it. At least, you know, Mark Ingram, he wants the ball a lot more. But I think that it can be important not only to keep the running backs fresh, but maybe also to keep the play calling less predictable and the defense off balance. And I mean, they had a solid. They had some nice running plays. They didn't have over 100 yards. I mean, I think they had 80-something, 88 yards rushing. But it was. I mean, when you have 500 yards of offense, it doesn't really matter, you know, how much passing or how much running, as long as you're moving the ball and scoring, which they did.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I think Ingram's a guy. The more touches you get him, the better he's going to get. He's proven that he's like a bowling ball around the goal line, and he can find a way into the end zone. I think, kind of like Brett said, though, the offense was just, you know, we're putting that ball in the air, and they were having so much success there. I will say, though, that I really did think C.J. Spiller would find a spot in there.
So did I.
He looked great in the preseason. I know one of the things that he mentioned, I think either in camp at the beginning or right before camp, was that he had the top end speed last year, but he didn't have the lateral movement. And then when you saw him in the preseason, there were a couple of games where he would catch a pass either right around the line of scrimmage and turn it into an 8-yard gain, or shake a couple of tackles, or really get through the hole well and be able to make a couple guys miss. And so if there was running back by committee, and I think the best benefit of that being getting Mark Ingram through a full season, if you can take a couple of carries from him with another guy who can carry the rock like that, I think that would have been the biggest benefit. But you know, as for now, the offensive line holds up like it does. I think Ingram has improved his pass catching enough to be able to keep guys off balance. He had 50 receptions last year, so even with him in the game, I don't know that they're going to key in on him too much.
Jeff Duncan wrote a column recently about Benson visiting the locker room after the Pittsburgh game, kind of reading the Team the Riot Act. I've heard from sources that was a ripple effect that went into the front office as well. Brett, what are you hearing? You know, Benson's been criticized by the fan base of, you know, not holding the front office accountable, not holding Payne accountable. You look at the situation with, again, 7 and 9 seasons, but getting the extension, getting the raise. Is this team been kind of put on notice by Tom Benson? What are you hearing? You guys are at camp all the time. What are you hearing?
Well, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I did hear about that as well, but it's just hard. It's hard to know. It almost seems like an anomaly, like as you mentioned, based on what we've seen in past years. That could have just been an emotional reaction to going to a game that night and just being really annoyed at what he saw. And it might have even been an overreaction given that it's a preseason game that he reacted to.
Right.
Because preseason is, I mean, we all know, I mean, you want to see guys, you want to see them play better than the 0-4 preseason they had, but at the same time, coaches, they're not really coaching to win in that they're isolating guys in matchups where they can evaluate the guys. They're not scheming,
Right.
you know, collectively.
But they were dominated by Pittsburgh,
11
too.
guys at a time. Yeah, right. But, you know, Pittsburgh might be loaded.
Yeah. Well, they're a pretty darn good team.
Yeah, they look like one of the best teams in the league, too. So, you know, I don't know. I think I don't feel like I can comfortably read into that situation yet.
Right. Do you feel comfortable in reading into it?
I think any motivating factor is a good one. Like Brett said, I don't know if preseason is the rah-rah time. Maybe after that Raiders game would have been a good time to kind of keep guys' heads up that, yeah, you just played a tremendous game except for the fourth quarter. But I think that there are certain things that you can do to be woken up. I'm sure a lot of those guys aren't really around Benson that much. And so when you do see him, it's like, oh, yeah, well,
Right.
the boss is here, so maybe we should kind of wake up. You know, after a preseason game, I don't know. I don't know how much to read into that, but the fact that the offensive line and, you know, they looked miles better than the preseason, whether it be motivation or the fact that they game planned, looks like it may have had a positive effect.
Your thoughts on Will Lutz? Never seen Peyton be so enamored with a kicker before. And kid's got a strong leg. The question is he going to be consistent?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, he thinks I think he actually sees him a lot like a young Garrett Hartley. I think that Sean must have seen some similarities there and is hoping that, you know, he's basically, you know, the talent of young Hartley without the mental baggage that Hartley developed over the course of his career when he just started inexplicably missing makeable kicks. But good NFL pros make 50-yarders. And
They sure do.
He didn't. Now, I'm not going to criticize him for the 61-yard kick because he really put a nice foot into it, actually, and it's a hard kick to make. But then also, it's like he was lucky to make the 20-yarder. And maybe that's a trajectory thing that's an easy fix that they can figure out. But it wasn't the kind of performance that made Sean look brilliant. It's more of a performance that says, I think I see what Sean saw, but we'll see, you know?
I think if anything, it gives you a reason to further dig into that. I mean, it was a move that everybody kind of raised an eyebrow at, and that the fact that it came down to a missed 50-yarder and then a 61-yarder, that just gives you reason to further raise an eyebrow at it. Like Brett said, I think it's the 50-yarder. That's the one you question. That's the one you wonder if the guy who won the kicking competition in camp, if he's there, does he make that kick? And do you not even have to worry about the 61-yarder later? Yeah, the leg is nice. I mean, everybody wants to find the next Greg Zuerlein, a guy that came out of nowhere. And I actually covered him for a game in Missouri when I worked up there. But, you know, you don't want that to cost you games right now. And that's a tough position to put a rookie in. I'm sure he sees it. He sees everybody say, well, who the heck is this guy? And, you know, where did that move come from? And now he's in there to make these big kicks. So it's a tough position to be in. I don't envy him. But it is nice. I know in the locker room there were guys around him. It's nice to hear Peyton kind of rally to him. He's a young guy. If the accuracy holds up, I think he can be a really solid option. But it does make it a questionable move right now, especially when it, I don't want to say cost you the game, but it could have helped.
Right. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports each and every Thursday night right here on WLAE with our live broadcast on Friday night at 10 o'clock on WLAE and on Pelican Sports Television, 9 p.m. every Friday night. Brett Martel, the Associated Press, Chris Hagan of Fox 8 Sports are our guests tonight. We'll be going to the phone lines in just a couple minutes. We get back, we'll tackle Tulane, we'll jump into LSU. All that coming up next on Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile. You're watching WLAE, New Orleans Public Television. Find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. We'll be going to the phone lines in just a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about Tulane. 66-21 over Southern. Much better performance against Southern than we saw against Wake Forest the week before. There's been a quarterback change now. Jonathan Brantley is the new starter based on his performance against Southern. He seems like the more dynamic athlete to me. 11 carries, 119 yards, had the big long run. Kuyet will be still getting some snaps with this team, but your thoughts so far on what you've seen out of Tulane after 2 games?
Well, the thing I like is that it seems like they have, and from all accounts, they do have a vision of where they want to go and what they want this team to be. There were games in prior years where you just weren't sure what their identity was, but you see how they want to move the ball. You see a defense that's been pretty opportunistic and played a really good game against Wake Forest. And then I do like the QB move. I think Kuyet gives you what you want as far as a guy who's got the football IQ, but in that offense where you want your best runner at quarterback. I know Fritz, insists that they want to throw the ball north of 20 times a game. I don't see this team necessarily being most successful doing that. And in that case, you take the average arm with the great legs and you run that ball, and I think Jonathan Brantley gives them a great chance to do that. Obviously, this weekend will be a little bit tougher of a test than Southern, but I'm excited to see what they can do, and it's going to be very option heavy out there Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll get into that in a moment. You had a chance to be out at Tulane this week. What's the vibe? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the vibe is very positive in that they've really cleaned up execution in a couple key areas. I mean, I watched a lot of their games last year, and as bad as their record was, they were in a lot of games for 2 to 3 quarters because their defense was really good. I mean, they had some great athletes on defense, and some of them wound up in the NFL, and they would just get worn out because between all of the 3 and outs by the offense compounded by unfathomable special teams blunders.
Yes.
Unreal.
They were out there all game on short fields, and they just couldn't hold up. And now you have Willie Fritz. He loves special teams. He oversees that himself. So you're having special teams execute better. You're having offense stay on the field longer, getting more first downs. And of course, against Southern, they really exploded. I mean, that's an FCS level team. So we're going to have to see what happens when they play a good defense and they're forced to throw the ball a little more, because Brantley, my understanding is, and I haven't really seen him play much, and I was at LSU Jacksonville State last weekend, not Tulane, but my understanding is he shows glimpses of being able to make nice throws, but he's totally unrefined and not consistent in that area. So that could be an issue. But it's still, like you said, there's like direction, there's athletes, there's execution, there's not beating yourself, and that could go a long way towards making them a lot more fun to watch and getting close to bowl eligibility.
Yeah, and as you mentioned this week against Navy, normally it's tough for a team to prepare for the triple option because they don't see it. Both of these teams have to practice against it every week, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of adjust to each other going forward.
I will say, I think, and Fritz said it, the triple option, the fact they run the option is what they have in common. Obviously, Navy is, that's their bread and butter, and there's multiple ways to run it. But I think one of the things that Fritz mentioned was that Navy has done this for so long. They know how to attack you no matter what you're going to throw at them defensively. They've been practicing against, their defense has been practicing against it for years. I still think it'll be a bit of a challenge for Tulane, but it certainly does help to see it in practice, and I think this is one of the better Tulane defenses going along with last year that can, at least keep them in the game. I think the benefit of playing against an option offense, if you can at least slow them down, they're not going to run away with the game unless you give up the big plays.
Right.
It's going to be it could be a low scoring 2 or 3 possessions a quarter game, which I think favors this Tulane team.
As you mentioned, they feasted on FCS Southern last week. This will be a step up in class with a Navy team that's very disciplined and runs the triple option to perfection.
Yeah, but LSU's defense is, like we said, their strength, and they know they were actually competitive against Navy last year
Yes.
when they had that excellent quarterback. It's Keenan Reynolds.
Yes.
Reynolds, yep.
And so now you have Tulane with its strength being its defense, playing against an offense that it practices against more, and Keenan Reynolds is not there for the other team. Not only that, but the guy that started the season is not there either. So they're already on their backup quarterback, I believe, because of an injury. So, and it's at Tulane. I'm definitely gonna, I'll be at Mississippi State at LSU in Death Valley again, but I'm definitely gonna DVR this game. I'll be eager to see it. I think it'll be just good from a novel standpoint of the entertainment value with all the triple option too.
Should be a quick game too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
It'll be a quick game, and I think it'll be one that could be a big momentum boost for Tulane. This is what you want when you start that conference schedule.
866-3200 is the phone number if you want to get involved in tonight's show. The Tigers beat Jacksonville State, another FCS team, one of the top teams there, 34-13. Brandon Harris with another poor performance. He is benched in favor of Danny Etling. And Chris, you've been up at LSU. First of all, it seemed the entire team was uplifted by Etling coming in the game. Etling seemed to have command of the offense. I saw him going through progressions where I haven't seen that out of Harris in the last couple seasons. He may not have the arm strength that a Harris has, but again, he seemed to be poised in the pocket and he seemed to be able to make the right reads. What's your take on Etling? What's the vibe you're getting out of LSU as you were up there covering them this week?
Well, the first thing is the thing you first mentioned. The crowd got into it, and that kind of brought the team to life. The ovation and the reception that Danny Etling got when he came in the game, they could barely get the play, and he was trying to hush the crowd up. And so Darius Geis said it when we talked Monday. That's what got them going, and you get that life. I mean, you can only expect the crowd to be in it so long when they're looking at run left, run right, and completion, or 3 straight incompletions, or near interceptions. It's demoralizing because it's what they've seen for years under Miles, and it's been unsuccessful. Really not a great offense there since 2013. And so I think when you bring everyone to life, and Etling does that, and he showed the composure, and he came in a pressure situation where fans were starving for a passing game. You listen to fans tell it, they might tell you he threw for 300 yards. The reality was he was 6 of 14 for 100 yards, but I think that's how welcomed everyone is to see a passing game for the Tigers.
He started off well, and that's for sure, and that was promising. But his second half passing numbers were worse than Brandon Harris's passing numbers for the first half. Right. And Harris was 1 for 4 for 8 yards. So, second half, we're looking at Etling, 0 for 6, no yards, a lost fumble on a sack and strip, and an interception on underthrown ball in the end zone. So I wouldn't say at this point he's a panacea.
But why are fans overlooking that?
They're overlooking that because his entrance into the game did dramatically change the game, and he led them on 3 straight touchdown drives, and LSU totally took over the game. The second half really was anticlimactic. So his poor showing in the second half came in a part of the game that was not really at all critical, and I think actually most fans had checked out, and a lot of fans had left by then.
Yeah, right.
So they didn't even see it. Get to see it. But
I think as much as it represented as much as they were happy to see Etling and come in the game as a new quarterback, it just represents change for an offensive game plan that has been as stubborn as they can be for the last several years. And so to at least see that open mind to try a new quarterback, to put the ball in the air and put faith in that new quarterback, not just put him in the game and tell him give the ball to Geis, but let him run some play action plays, put him in shotgun, let him throw the ball down the field. I think that's what fans were also applauding.
Yeah, and I also would want to caution fans of getting too annoyed when they hear Les Miles stress that, you know, they still view Brandon Harris as a factor in having two quarterbacks.
Absolutely.
And there's two reasons why. One is because, you know, like we said, you know, we don't really know if Etling's going to be consistent enough to last the whole game. And second, what if Etling gets hurt? I mean, they need to keep Brandon Harris as absolutely engaged as possible in every practice and every play, just in case, because quarterbacks do get knocked out too.
And the experience factor.
Yeah.
Brandon Harris has been to these SEC stadiums. He's seen it. You saw it. There's no better comparison than a couple of years ago when Harris came in for Jennings. Then Harris starts against Auburn, and it's the worst game of his life. Just an absolute nightmare out there for 60 minutes. And so while I don't think that necessarily happens to Etling because he's not a freshman, he started games at Purdue, he's seen a little bit more action than Harris had when he went in against Auburn. I still think, like you said, you've got to keep Harris there as, you know, look, if you can get him corralled back into the right mindset and shake off everything that's happened these first 2 weeks, you've invested too much in him. He's been the guy. He's been a team leader. You can't just lose him now.
Well, again, the camera kept panning on Harris during the game, and he seemed to be pouting, disengaged. You know, I would have liked to have seen him with the headset on, around the other quarterbacks, you know, in Etling's ear, telling him what he's saying, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't see that. And again, I guess the coaching staff is going to have to get him motivated again, because I think Les Miles is right. You don't know what Danny Etling's going to do yet, and there could be an injury down the line. You'll be right back to Brandon Harris. But he's got to understand, as I mentioned on the radio show this week, you know, it's a competition. It's not a birthright. And at the end of the day, if you lose the competition or you're not doing it well, you're not playing well, every other position on that team is interchangeable. And when you are demoted, you can't take it as a punishment. You just have to take it as, you know what, I got to get out there and I work that much harder to be able to get my position back. And you know, I thought he took it the wrong way, and then it's a little disconcerting to be able to hear that, you know, it's nerves. You know, at first it was he didn't understand the playbook. He came from a high school program where, again, the playbook was too complicated for him. You know, then he learns the playbook. Now it's a case of nerves. He gets nervous. He gets emotional during the game. You know, you're the leader of the team at the quarterback position, and guys look to you for leadership. And, you know, we've seen guys, you know, in our times playing athletics at a lower level. Some guys can play when the lights are on. Some guys are great at practice. Right now, for what we understand, Harris is a pretty good practice player. Just hasn't gotten it done in the games.
Well, I'm not going to pretend to even think that I can imagine what Harris goes through as a college quarterback who's on Twitter, and you look at his mentions, he probably gets death threats in there, all kinds of people telling him everything. I mean, that stuff happens. But at the same time, you're not the only college quarterback of a big program. And when you talk the game that Harris talked, I think that's the big thing, or one of the big things here is that he's the few times that he's actually been allowed to talk to the media, he's a pretty cool customer talking, and he's confident in himself and his abilities, and then it just doesn't always show on the field, or maybe it shows a little too much. I think that last throw against Wisconsin was a result of him thinking, I don't need to reset my feet, I can just throw this ball, and it was way off the mark or wherever he was looking. So there's a couple of things there, but to call it even a punishment, Miles didn't publicly name a starter. He said he couldn't imagine Etling not taking the first snaps. That's about as good as it gets for Miles naming a starter, but he was far and away from saying Etling's our guy going forward. He reiterated multiple times in the press conference on Monday that they would need Harris going forward, and I think he's exactly right in that regard. Let's
head to the phone lines. Tom is in Metairie. Tom, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Tom.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for the
call.
Hey,
Eric, I called last week, and I said that there's no way Les Miles would even try Etling. So I called to eat my words. I can't believe he actually put him on the field, and he did well. And I was also at the game, and I was watching Harris as well. I was disappointed in the way he reacted to being taken off the field. And there's a video flying around with him not singing the alma mater after the game. I think maybe this guy give him a little bit of time, maybe not being a starter, take some pressure off him, he gets back in, and he plays well later. So I think these are young guys, and like I said, maybe a second chance will give him He'll do a lot better not being a starter. I'll hang up, listen to you guys.
Thanks. Brett, your thoughts?
Well, I think that it would be reasonable to think Harris would be emotionally devastated, and he's still, 20 years old? And he's been the projected starter for 2 off seasons, and this season came in with huge expectations. And game 1 is a disaster, and he goes out looking to redeem himself against an FCS team and gets the hook after 2 series. I do think, now he is a genuine communicator and sometimes shoots from the hip when he talks to us. I think it's possible, and I don't know this for at all, but I think it's possible that Harris was instructed to get off the field as fast as possible after the game, because the media is allowed on the sideline for the last couple minutes of the game.
Yes.
He could have been corralled and asked in a very emotionally vulnerable state some questions that LSU did not want him to answer. So
This is always the case.
Yes.
So I don't want to read, I don't want to read too much into him running off the field to the locker room directly after the game until I have a better understanding of why exactly that happened.
Right. And I'm not getting on the kid for the Twitter comments, because, as I said on the radio show, it's not smart, but he is a college kid, and I didn't have Twitter when I was in college, and it's just difficult for these guys, I mean, when you're emotional and you put things down on Twitter that maybe you'd like to be able to take back, it's something that young kids today have to deal with that maybe we didn't have to deal with coming up. And of course, I'm older than both you guys.
Yeah, it's a thing where you just put something out there for a second, you kind of live in your own world, and then all of a sudden you realize everybody's trying to get in your world. And those tweets can be seen by anyone. I think he made his Twitter page private now and deleted a couple of tweets. But that's what it is. And I mean, Harris came up in this era of extreme media presence in the world of recruiting, and people looking at, if you're wearing a purple backpack to high school on signing day, then you might be going to LSU. And so there's a lot out there, and I think you just got to be a little bit smarter with social media.
Yeah, no doubt. Wallace is in New Orleans. Wallace, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Wallace, you with us? Okay, Wallace is gone. Malachi Dupree having a little problem in catching the football. This guy is going to play on the next level. He's got the talent. I don't know if it's mental. I don't know. I had mentioned this week maybe he needs to get his prescription for his eyeglasses checked. But just all of a sudden, he just seems to have a case of the drops. I know that Miles addressed it this week. Your thoughts on Dupree? Because I think he can bounce back. He needs to bounce back for his quarterback.
Yeah, I think he can bounce back. Some of them are tough balls. Some of them, like the one from Etling on that first drive that hit him right in the hands, I think he needs to come down with. I think maybe if he catches some of those, we might not be talking about Brandon Harris being out of a game right now. If they can move the chains on a couple of those drives and get Harris going, I mean, at some point your receiver has to do something to help out the quarterback. So I'm thinking he can shake it off. It's just a matter of getting used to that physical play and using your size. He doesn't necessarily bring his arms up to catch the ball with him. So he needs to use that big body, because you can't let corners who are that much smaller than you affect you on those jump balls.
At least he was an equal opportunity dropper and dropped balls from both
Both of them.
guys. My biggest criticism of him in the interception in the end zone was just that he didn't break it up.
Yes.
But I've covered him since he came into LSU, and I've seen him make a lot of spectacular plays. He might not be Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham Jr., but he's pretty close.
Yeah.
So hopefully he'll
What about Aranda's defense? What have you seen out of it so far? What do you like? What do you don't like? Does it fit what these guys are doing up to this point? I'm talking about the athletes. Take you first, Brett.
Yeah, I think the players like it, and we've seen some big plays and turnovers and sacks and so forth, and not just against Jacksonville State, but against Wisconsin. And Jacksonville State's offense had a former LSU receiver, a former Auburn running back, and a quarterback who's going to end his career with 10,000 yards, which is going to be more than 2,000 yards than anybody in the history of Jacksonville State. So that was not, a typical second-tier offense. Yeah,
and a Wisconsin receiver, ex-Wisconsin receiver too, right?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
I think it's a combination of Aranda and the fact that they've been blessed with a lot of experience returning. When you've got seniors like Trey White, you've got a guy like Kendall Beckwith who, and let's be honest, I mean, it's not necessarily easy for a lot of these guys going through 3 coordinators in as many years.
Right.
And so, but Beckwith as a leader, you can see him communicating on the field so much more than when he had his first start I think against Florida a couple of years ago, and now to where he is. I think, like Brett mentioned, a lot of those guys are really flourishing in the position that they're put in. Arden Key is a pass rusher, and certain packages that take advantage of different safeties in different spots, close to the line of scrimmage, Trey White and nickel. So I think personnel-wise and coordinator-wise, it's the perfect unity right now.
What about the offensive line? What have you seen so far? It's not the offensive lines of the past, still kind of a work in progress here. Do they have the ability to be better, to be dominant as they get into SEC play?
I don't know. They definitely struggled in the first game, although it was hard for me to really decipher if it was more communication and assignment struggling or just physical. I doubt it actually was physical. And they did better last week, and that was even without Josh Booty, who's coming back. So, Miles seems to think they're improving, but he always puts a positive spin on that.
What about the eye test for you?
Yeah, I think they've improved. You want to see them lay off the penalties with this offense, and their struggles to move the ball sometimes. The last thing you can do is move in the opposite direction. I think there are a couple guys, Maya Tahuma, that have shown a lot of potential, but still make those mental errors sometimes. Toby Weathersby, a tackle as well. So they can get better, and it's going to get tougher. The ultimate test obviously comes every year in November, when if you can't win the line of scrimmage, you don't stand a chance against Alabama. And so they've got from now until then, I don't want to say with easy opponents, but easier than what you're going to see when you face those massive lines from Bama and Arkansas.
This defensive line's pretty good, though. A.J. Jefferson seems to have come on. They're allowing 60 yards per game rushing so far. So,
well, all of a sudden, the schedule doesn't look as easy as it did maybe at the beginning of the season. South Alabama looks like it's a pretty decent team. You look down the schedule. I think it'll be a little bit tougher on the Tigers than a lot of people thought when they looked at that schedule going in, when they were circling, November at Alabama.
Right.
Yeah, there's no doubt. You look at the way they performed that first week, a lot of that schedule got a lot muddier when you look at how Auburn performed against Clemson at home. They've got to go to Auburn. They've got to go to Florida. They've got to go to Arkansas, who just beat TCU. These are not games you can, shrug off at all.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Guys, do you like the Tigers this week against Mississippi State?
I do. I think, the return of Leonard Fournette and the combination of Tiger Stadium, I'll give them this first SEC win.
Yeah, I'm there too. I mean, the odds makers have them favored by 14, I think, as well. So, but yeah, their defense looks good. Mississippi State's quarterback was promising, but it's going to be tough for him in Tiger Stadium.
I got about 25 seconds. I want to get both Tulane and Saints. Saints versus Giants.
I'm taking the Giants.
Right.
I just think there's too much at wide receiver.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's a tough road game to win. The way the Giants are looking.
Tulane Navy.
I'm going to go with Tulane. I think Brett kind of sold me on it, actually.
Yeah.
Their defense and working against the option. I'm going to go Tulane.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, sounds good. Brett Martel, Chris Hagan, thanks for being with us tonight on Inside New Orleans Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE at 10 p.m. Also on Pelican Sports Television in the New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette markets. That's 9 p.m. every Friday night. You can catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO, weekdays, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. Also on the TuneIn radio app, and you can catch us live at ericasher.com, where you can listen live or download the podcast. Also, all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports can be seen at ericasher.com as well. Again, special thanks to Chris Hagan and Brett Martel, also to the WLAE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Kenny Juno, Naila Jones, also Richard King, Philip Williamson, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you right back here next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Have a great evening.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.